This is There's a Boy in the Girls' Bathroom by Louis Sacker. Chapter 1. Bradley Chalker sat at his desk in the back of the room, last seat, last row. No one sat at the desk next to him or at the one in front of him. He was an island. If he could have, he would have sat in the closet. Then he could shut the door so he wouldn't have to listen to Mrs. Ebel. He didn't think she'd mind. She'd probably like it better that way too. So would the rest of the class. All in all, he thought everyone would be much happier if he sat in the closet. But unfortunately, his desk didn't fit. "Class," said Mrs. Ebel, "I would like you all to meet Jeff Fishkin. Jeff has just moved here from Washington, D.C., which, as you know, is our nation's capital." Bradley looked up at the new kid who was standing at the front of the room next to Mrs. Ebel. "Why don't you tell the class a little bit about yourself, Jeff?" urged Mrs. Ebel. The new kid shrugged. "There's no reason to be shy," said Mrs. Ebel. The new kid mumbled something, but Bradley couldn't hear what it was. "Have you ever been to the White House, Jeff?" Mrs. Ebel asked. "I'm sure the class would be very interested to hear about that." "No, I've never been there," the new kid said very quickly as he shook his head. Mrs. Ebel smiled at him. "Well, I guess we'd better find you a place to sit." She looked around the room. I don't see any place except, I suppose you can sit there at the back." "No, not next to Bradley," a girl in the front row exclaimed. "At least it's better than in front of Bradley," said the boy next to her. Mrs. Ebel frowned. She turned to Jeff. "I'm sorry, but there are no other empty desks." "I don't mind where I sit," Jeff mumbled. "Well, nobody likes sitting there," said Mrs. Ebel. "That's right," Bradley spoke up. "Nobody likes sitting next to me." He smiled a strange smile. He stretched his mouth so wide it was hard to tell whether it was a smile or a frown. He stared at Jeff with bulging eyes as Jeff awkwardly sat down next to him. Jeff smiled back at him, so he looked away. As Mrs. Ebel began the lesson, Bradley took out a pencil and a piece of paper and scribbled. He scribbled most of the morning, sometimes on the paper and sometimes on his desk. Sometimes he scribbled so hard his pencil point broke. Every time that happened, he laughed. Then he'd tape the broken point to one of the gobs of junk in his desk, sharpen his pencil, and scribble again. His desk was full of little wads of torn paper, pencil points, chewed erasers, and other unrecognizable stuff all taped together. Mrs. Ebel handed back a language test. "Most of you did very well," she said. "I was very pleased. There were 14 A's and the rest B's. Of course, there was one F, but—" She shrugged her shoulders. Bradley held up his test for everyone to see and smiled that same distorted smile. As Mrs. Ebel went over the correct answers with the class, Bradley took out his pair of scissors and very carefully cut his test paper into tiny squares. When the bell rang for recess, he put on his red jacket and walked outside alone. "Hey, Bradley, wait up!" Somebody called after him. Startled, he turned around. Jeff, the new kid, hurried alongside him. "Hi," said Jeff. Bradley stared at him in amazement. Jeff smiled. "I don't mind sitting next to you," he said. "Really." Bradley didn't know what to say. "I have been to the White House," Jeff admitted. "If you want, I'll tell you about it." Bradley thought a moment, then said, "Give me $1 or I'll spit on you." Chapter 2. There are some kids, you can tell just by looking at them, who are good spitters. That is probably the best way to describe Bradley Chalkers. He looked like a good spitter. He was the oldest and the toughest-looking kid in Mrs. Ebel's class. He was a year older than the other kids. That was because he had taken the 4th grade twice. Now he was in the 5th grade for the first, but probably not the last time. Jeff stared at him, then gave him $1 and ran away. Bradley laughed to himself, then watched all the other kids have fun. When he returned to class after recess, he was surprised Mrs. Ebel didn't say anything to him. He figured that Jeff would probably tell on him and that he'd have to give the $1 back. He sat at his desk in the back of the room, last seat, last row. "He's afraid to tell on me," he decided. "He knows if he tells on me, I'll punch his face in." He laughed to himself. He ate lunch alone, too. As he walked in from lunch, Mrs. Ebel called him to her desk. "Who, me?" he asked. He glared at Jeff, who was already sitting down. "I didn't do anything." "Did you give my note to your mother?" asked Mrs. Ebel. "What note? You never gave me a note." Mrs. Ebel sighed. "Yes, I did, Bradley. In fact, I gave you 2 notes because you said the first one was stolen." "Oh, that's right," he said. "I gave it to her a long time ago." Mrs. Ebel eyed him suspiciously. "Bradley, I think it's very important for your mother to come tomorrow." "Tomorrow is parents' conference day." "She can't come," said Bradley. "She's sick." You never gave her the note, did you? Call her doctor if you don't believe me. The school has just hired a new counselor, said Mrs. Ebel, and I think it's very important that your mother meet her. Oh, they already met, said Bradley. They go bowling together. I'm trying to help you, Bradley. Call the bowling alley if you don't believe me. Okay, Bradley, said Mrs. Ebel, and she let the matter drop. Bradley returned to his seat, glad that was over. He glanced at Jeff, surprised Jeff hadn't told on him. And as he scribbled, he kept thinking about what Jeff had said to him. Hey, Bradley, wait up. Hi, I don't mind sitting next to you. Really, I have been to the White House. If you want, I'll tell you about it. It confused him. He understood it when the other kids were mean to him. It didn't bother him. He simply hated them. As long as he hated them, it didn't matter what they thought of him. That was why he had threatened to spit on Jeff. He had to hate Jeff before Jeff hated him. But now he was confused. Hey, Bradley, wait up. Hi, I don't mind sitting next to you, really. The words rolled around in his head and banged against his brain. After school, he followed Jeff out the door. Hey, Jeff, he called, wait up. Jeff turned, then started to run, but Bradley was faster. He caught up to Jeff at the corner of the school building. I don't have any more money, Jeff said nervously. I'll give you $1 if you'll be my friend, said Bradley. He held out the $1 Jeff had given him earlier. Jeff slowly reached out, then grabbed it. Bradley smiled his same twisted smile. Have you ever been to the White House? He asked. Yes, said Jeff. Me too, said Bradley. He turned and ran home. Chapter 3. Bradley opened the front door to his house, then made a face. It smelled like fish. You're home early, his mother said from the kitchen. She was a large woman with fat arms. She was wearing a sleeveless green dress and holding a butcher knife. My friends and me, we raced home, he told her. A fat fish about the size of one of Mrs. Chalker's arms lay on a board on the counter. Bradley watched her raise the knife above the fish, then quickly hack off its head. He walked down the hall to his room and closed the door. Hey, everybody, he announced. Bradley's home. But he was pretending that it was someone else who was speaking. Hi, Bradley, he said. Hi, everyone, he answered, this time speaking for himself. He was talking to his collection of little animals. He had about 20 of them. There was a brass lion that he had found one day in a garbage can on the way to school. There was an ivory donkey that his parents had brought back from their trip to Mexico. There were 2 owls that were once used as salt and pepper shakers, a glass unicorn with its horn broken, a family of cocker spaniels attached around an ashtray, a raccoon, a fox, an elephant, a kangaroo, and some that were so chipped and broken you couldn't tell what they were. And they were all friends. And they all liked Bradley. Where's Ronnie? Bradley asked. And Bartholomew? I don't know, said the fox. They're always going off together, said the kangaroo. Bradley leaned across the bed and reached under his pillow. He pulled Ronnie the rabbit and Bartholomew the bear. He knew they were under his pillow because that's where he had put them before he went to school. What were you two doing back there? He demanded. Ronnie giggled. She was a little red rabbit with tiny blue eyes glued on her face. One ear was broken. Nothing, Bradley, she said. I was just taking a walk. I had to go to the bathroom, said Bartholomew. He was a brown and white ceramic bear that stood on his hind legs. His mouth was open, revealing beautifully made teeth and a red tongue. They were making out, announced the Mexican donkey. I saw them kissing. Ronnie giggled. Oh, Ronnie, scolded Bradley. What am I going to do with you? She giggled again. Bradley reached into his pocket and took out a handful of cut-up bits of paper, his language test. Look, everybody, he said. I brought you some food. He dropped the bits of paper onto the bed, then scooped all his animals into it. Not so fast, he said. There's plenty for everybody. Thank you, Bradley, said Ronnie. It's delicious. Yeah, it's really good, said Bartholomew. Don't play with your food, the mother cocker spaniel told her 3 children. Pass the salt, said the pepper owl. Pass the pepper, said the salt owl. Let's hear it for Bradley, called the lion. They all cheered. Yay, Bradley! Ronnie finished eating, then hopped off by herself, singing doo-dee-doo-dee-doo. Then she said, I think I'll go swimming in the pond. The pond was a purple stain on Bradley's bedspread where he had once spilled grape juice. Ronnie jumped into the water. Suddenly she cried, Help! I have a cramp! You shouldn't have gone swimming right after eating, Bradley reminded her. Help! I'm drowning! Bartholomew looked up. That sounds like Ronnie, he said. It sounds like she's drowning in the pond. He hurried to the pond to rescue her. Hold on, Ronnie, he shouted. The door to Bradley's room swung open, and his sister Claudia barged in. She was 4 years older than Bradley. "Get out of here," he snapped at her, "or I'll punch your face in." "What are you doing?" she teased. "Talking to your little animal friends?" She laughed, showing her braces. It was Claudia, who had broken Ronnie's ear. She had stepped on it accidentally. She told Bradley it was his fault for leaving his animals strewn all over the floor. He didn't tell her that Ronnie wasn't on the floor, but lost in the desert. Instead, he had said, "Who cares, it's just a stupid red rabbit." "Mom wants you," said Claudia. "She told me to get you." "What does she want?" "She wants to talk to you. Tell your animals you'll be right back." "I wasn't talking to them," Bradley insisted. "What were you doing then?" "I was arranging them. I was putting them all in alphabetical order. It's a project for school. Call my teacher if you don't believe me." Claudia snickered. Although she always made fun of Bradley's animals, she really had felt bad when she stepped on the rabbit. She knew it was Bradley's favorite. She had bought him the bear to make up for it. "What do I want a bear for?" he said when she gave it to him. Bradley went into the kitchen. The fish, now cut up and covered with onions, was frying on top of the stove. "You want me?" he asked. "How's everything at school?" asked his mother. "Great. In fact, today I was elected class president." "Your grades are all right?" "Yes, Mrs. Ebel handed back a language test today, and I got another A. In fact, it was an A+. "May I see it?" "Mrs. Ebel hung it up on the wall, next to all my other A tests." "Mrs. Ebel just called," said his mother. His heart fluttered. "Why didn't you tell me tomorrow was Parents' Conference Day?" asked his mother. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked innocently. "No, I don't think so." "I told you," he said. "You said you couldn't go. You must have forgot." "Mrs. Ebel seems to think it's important for me to be there," said his mother. "That's just her job," said Bradley. "The more mothers she sees, the more money she makes." "Well, I made an appointment with her for 11 o'clock tomorrow morning." Bradley stared at her in disbelief. "No, you can't go," he shouted, stamping his foot. "It's not fair." "Bradley, what? It's not fair, it's not fair." He ran into his bedroom and slammed the door shut behind him. A moment later, his mother knocked on the door. "What is it?" she asked. "What's not fair?" "It's not fair," he yelled. "You promised." "What did I promise, Bradley? What did I promise?" He didn't answer. He couldn't until he thought up why it wasn't fair and what she had promised him. He stayed in his room until Claudia told him that he had to come to dinner. He followed her out to the dining room, where his mother and father were already sitting down. "Did you wash your hands?" asked their father. "Yes," Bradley and Claudia lied. Bradley's father worked in the police department. He had been shot in the leg 4 years ago while chasing a robber. Now he needed a cane to walk, so he worked behind a desk. He didn't like that kind of work and often came home grumpy and short-tempered. The police never caught the man who had shot him. "I hate fish," Bradley said as he sat down. "So do I," said Claudia. "It sticks to my braces and I taste it for weeks." "Brussels sprouts make me throw up," said Bradley. "They smell like old garbage," said Claudia. "That's enough," said their father. "You'll both eat what's on your plates." Bradley held his nose with one hand while he picked up a Brussels sprout with the other and put it whole in his mouth. "What's all this nonsense about your mother breaking her promise?" asked their father. Bradley was ready. "She promised she'd take me to the zoo tomorrow, and now she won't." "What?" exclaimed his mother. "I never said I'd take you to the zoo." "She did too," said Bradley. "Since there is no school tomorrow, she said she'd take me to the zoo." "I didn't even know there was no school tomorrow until the teacher called me this afternoon," his mother protested. "You promised," said Bradley. "Okay," said his father. "Janet, what time is your appointment tomorrow with Bradley's teacher?" 11 o'clock. "Okay, you can go to your appointment and still have time to take Bradley to the zoo after lunch." "But I never said I'd take him to the zoo." "You did," accused Bradley, "and we have to go in the morning. We have to be at the zoo at 11 o'clock. Claudia snickered. "Why do you have to be at the zoo at 11 o'clock? He glared at her, then turned back to his father. "Because that's when they feed the lions." Claudia laughed. "She promised she'd take me to see them feed the lions at 11 o'clock, Bradley insisted. His mother was flabbergasted. I don't even know when they feed the lions." 11 o'clock, said Bradley. "Don't lie to your mother," said his father. "Really," said Bradley, "they feed the lions at 11 o'clock. "I don't tolerate lying," said his father. "I'm not lying," said Bradley. "Call the zoo if you don't believe me. Don't lie to your mother and don't lie to me." "Call the zoo." "Your mother said she never promised to take you to the zoo." "She's lying." Right after he said it, he knew it was a mistake. His father turned purple with rage. "Don't ever call your mother a liar. Now go to your room." "Just call the zoo," Bradley pleaded. "Maybe I did tell him I'd take him to the zoo," said his mother. "See?" said Bradley. "Keep it up, Bradley," said his father. "Just keep it up. You want to be a criminal when you grow up? You want to spend your life in jail? I see people just like you every day at the police station. Just keep it up. Bradley stared angrily at his father. Not all criminals go to jail, he asserted. What about the man who shot you? I said go to your room. Bradley stood up from the table. I didn't want to eat this junk anyway. He stomped down the hall into his room and slammed the door. Then he opened it and shouted, Call the zoo! One last time, then slammed it again. He lay on his bed and cried. Don't cry, Bradley, said Ronnie. Everything will be all right. You'll think of something, Bradley, said Bartholomew. You always do. You're the smartest kid in the world. Chapter 4. Bradley stood at the front door and hollered, Mrs. Ebel is a liar. Don't believe anything she tells you. Bradley's mother got into the car, gritted her teeth, and drove to school. She was just as afraid as Bradley, if not more so, of what Mrs. Ebel would tell her. She wanted to believe Bradley when he told her he was getting all A's or was elected class president. She tried to fool herself that it could be true, even though she knew it couldn't. She knew her son, and she knew Mrs. Ebel wouldn't take the trouble to call her on the phone if everything was really as wonderful as Bradley said it was. Still, she hoped. She opened the door to Bradley's classroom. No one was there. Hello? She called out timidly. She looked around. There was a bulletin board covered with A papers. She looked from one paper to another and hoped with all her heart that she'd see one with Bradley's name on it. She didn't. In the back corner of the room, she saw a chart that listed the name of every student in the class. Next to each name was a row of gold stars. Next to Bradley Chalkers, there was no stars. Mrs. Chalkers? Startled, she turned around to see Mrs. Ebel. Oh, you scared me, she said, then smiled. Mrs. Ebel didn't smile. Mrs. Chalkers sat at her chair next to the teacher's desk and bravely listened as Mrs. Ebel told her about Bradley. There was nothing Mrs. Ebel said that she didn't already know. Still, it hurt to hear it. Deep down, he really is a good boy, she tried to tell Bradley's teacher. I'm sure he has a lot of good qualities, said Mrs. Ebel. However, I have 28 other children in my class, and I can't spend all my time trying to help Bradley. He has to decide whether he wants to be a part of the class or not, and if he doesn't want to be a part of the class, then he shouldn't be here. He just makes it that much harder for everyone else. What can I do? Asked Bradley's mother. The school has just hired a counselor, said Mrs. Ebel. I'd like your permission for Bradley to begin seeing her once a week. Anything that will help my son, said Mrs. Chalkers. I don't know if she can help him or not, said Mrs. Ebel. Bradley has a very serious behavior problem. If he doesn't show improvement soon, more drastic measures will have to be taken. Deep down, he really is a good boy, said Bradley's mother. Well, let's go meet the counselor, said Mrs. Ebel. She led Bradley's mother down the halls to the counselor's office. The door was open, but no one was there. Bradley's mother stepped into the room. Boxes were everywhere. Some were turned over, with their contents half spilled onto the floor. A yellow ladder lay on its side. In the center of the room was a round table surrounded by chairs, but the table and chairs were covered with papers and boxes and games and books. There was hardly room for Bradley's mother and teacher to stand. She's just moving in, Mrs. Ebel explained. I'm sure she'll have it cleaned up by tomorrow. Mrs. Chalkers shrugged. She picked up a dolphin puppet from an open box on the table and put her hand inside it. Suddenly, there was a loud grunt and a young woman entered the room. She dropped the box she was carrying, and more than 100 crayons spilled out across the floor. Oh, hello, she said. She was a lot younger than either Mrs. Ebels or Mrs. Chalkers. She wore blue jeans and a red t-shirt with rock and roll written across it in light blue letters. She had light brown hair, almost blonde, and clear blue eyes. I'm Carla Davis, she said, and held out her hand. Bradley's mother stared at her a moment, then reached out to shake her hand, but suddenly realized she was still wearing the dolphin puppet. She quickly removed it and put it back in the box on the table. The counselor smiled. She needs to sign the form so that you can start seeing her son, said Mrs. Ebel. Miss Davis looked hopelessly around her office. They're around here somewhere, she muttered, then began tearing into the boxes. Perhaps I'd better come back, said Bradley's mother. Found them, said the counselor, holding up the forms. She cleared a space on the round table by pushing away a box that gave Mrs. Chalkers a form to sign. Bradley's mother looked around the messy office, then at the young woman with the rock and roll t-shirt. She shrugged her shoulders and signed her name. Miss Davis took the form from her. Oh, you're Bradley Chalkers' mother. Mrs. Chalkers nodded. You would not believe all the horror stories I've heard about Bradley Chalkers, said the new counselor. I've been here less than 3 hours, but it seems like every teacher in the school has dropped by to warn me about him. Deep down, he really is, Bradley's mother started to say. I can't wait to meet him, the counselor interrupted. He sounds charming, just delightful. Chapter 5. At dinner, Bradley's father asked how the meeting with Bradley's teacher went. Bradley looked down at his mashed potatoes. Fine, said his mother. Bradley's doing very well. Good, glad to hear it, said his father. Bradley was glad to hear it too. Later that evening, his mother came into his room. I met Miss Davis, the new counselor, she said. You're going to begin seeing her tomorrow. No, said Bradley, I won't go. Please, Bradley, don't be that way. She can help you if you'll let her. I don't need any help. You said I was doing very well. Did you want me to tell your father the truth? Do you want to be sent to military school? Maybe he's right. I don't know. Maybe that's what you need. You said I was doing very well. I heard you. Please, Bradley, said his mother. Give Miss Davis a chance, please. You should have taken me to the zoo. It was drizzling the next morning as Bradley walked to school. He wore red rubber boots and a yellow raincoat. He stamped in every puddle along the way, making big splashes. He suddenly stopped when he saw Jeff standing next to the school under the overhang. Bradley's right foot remained in the center of a puddle as he stared at his one and only friend. He took a deep breath and slowly walked toward Jeff. He has to like me, he tried to convince himself. I gave him $1. Hi, Bradley, Jeff greeted him. He didn't answer. If you want, I can help you with your homework sometimes, Jeff offered. I know I'm new here, but I'm pretty smart, and we learned the same stuff in my old school. He shrugged modestly. Bradley looked at Jeff as if he were from outer space. I don't need any help, he said. I'm the smartest kid in class. Ask anyone. They headed for Mrs. Ebel's room, side by side, but not necessarily together. Chapter 6. Jeff Fishkin was hopelessly lost. He clutched his hall pass as he looked down the long, empty corridor. The school seemed so big to him. He was on his way to see the new counselor. She was supposed to help him adjust to his new environment. Now, he not only didn't know how to get to her office, he had no idea how to get back to Mrs. Ebel's class either. The floor was slippery. It had started raining during recess, and the kids had tracked water and mud inside with them. A teacher carrying a stack of paper stepped out of the door, and Jeff hurried up to her. Can you tell me where the counselor's office is, please? He asked. His voice trembled. The teacher first checked to make sure he had a hall pass. Then she said, The counselor's office? Let's see. Go down this hall to the end, turn right, and it's the third door on your left. Thank you very much, said Jeff. He started to go. No, wait, said the teacher. That's not right. She's in the new office in the other wing. Turn around and go back the way you just came, then turn left at the end of the hall, and it's the second door on your right. Thank you, Jeff said again. He walked to the end of the hall, turned right, counted to the second door on his left, and pushed it open. A girl with red hair and a freckled face was washing her hands at the sink. When she saw Jeff, her mouth dropped open. What are you doing in here? She asked. Huh? Jeff uttered. Get out of here, she yelled. This is the girls' bathroom. Jeff froze. He covered his face with his hands and then dashed out the door. There's a boy in the girls' bathroom, the girl screamed after him. He raced down the hall. Suddenly, his feet slipped out from under him. He waved his arms wildly as he tried to keep his balance, then flopped down on the floor. Oh, no, 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 oh, no, 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 he groaned. What have I done? Oh, why didn't I just read the sign on the door? This is the worst day of my whole life. Suddenly, he realized he was no longer holding a hall pass. He stood up and frantically looked around. Don't tell me I dropped it in the girls' bathroom. He heard someone coming and hurried off in the opposite direction. He rounded the corner, then spotted what looked like some kind of storage room. It was cluttered with boxes. He ducked inside and closed the door behind him. Hello, said a voice. He spun around. A woman stepped down off a yellow ladder. You must be Jeff, she said. I'm Carla Davis. She smiled and held out her hand. I'm so glad you've come. I was afraid you might get lost. Chapter 7. Jeff sat at the round table. The counselor sat across from him. So how do you like Red Hill School? She asked. He stared straight ahead. There's a boy in the girls' bathroom, echoed inside his head. I imagine it must seem a little scary, said the counselor. He didn't answer. I think it's scary, she said. It seems so big. Any time I try to go anywhere, I get lost. He smiled weakly. It's hard for me because I'm new here, she explained. Today is only my second day of school. I don't know anybody. Nobody knows me. The other teachers all look at me strangely. It's hard for me to make friends with them. They already have their own friends. I know what you mean, Jeff said. Maybe you can help me, said the counselor. Me? Said Jeff. How can I help you? I'm the one who needs help. Well, maybe we can help each other. What do you think about that? How? We're the two new kids at school, she said. We can share our experiences and learn from each other. Jeff smiled. Okay, Miss Davis, he said. Jeff, she said, if we're going to be friends, I want you to call me Carla, not Miss Davis. He laughed. Do you think Carla's a funny name? Oh, no, I just never called a teacher by her first name, that's all. But we're friends. Friends don't call each other Miss David and Mr. Fishkin, do they? Jeff laughed again. No, he said, then he frowned. The kids in my class call me Fishface. Have you made any friends? Asked Carla. I sort of made one friend, said Jeff, but I don't like him. How can you be friends if you don't like him? Nobody likes him. At first I felt sorry for him because nobody wanted to sit next to him. Mrs. Ebel said it out loud right in front of the whole class. Nobody likes sitting there, she said. It was like he wasn't even there. It's bad enough when a kid says something like that, but a teacher? It must have hurt his feelings, said Carla. No, he just smiled. He may have been smiling on the outside, but do you think he was really smiling on the inside? I don't know. I guess not. I guess that's why I tried to be friends with him. I told him I liked sitting next to him, but then he said, give me $1 or I'll spit on you. What did you do? I gave him $1. I didn't want him to spit on me, but then later he said, I'll give you $1 to be my friend, so I took it. It was my dollar, so does that mean I have to be his friend, even though I just broke even? What do you think friendship is? Carla asked him. I don't know. I mean, I know what it is, but I can't explain it. Is it something you can buy and sell? Can you go to the store and get a quart of milk, a dozen eggs, and a friend? Jeff laughed. No. So does that mean I don't have to be friends with him? I won't tell you what to do, said Carla. All I can do is help you think for yourself. I don't even know if Bradley wants to be my friend, said Jeff. Today at recess we hung around together, but we didn't do anything. He acted like I wasn't there. Then, when it started to rain, he ran around trying to push little kids into the mud. Could you share your feelings with him? Asked Carla. That's the real way to build a friendship, by talking and by being honest and by sharing your feelings. Like the way we're talking and being honest with each other now. That's why we're friends. But Bradley's different than you and me, said Jeff. I think you'll find that if you're nice to Bradley, he'll be nice to you. If you're honest and friendly with him, he'll be honest and friendly with you. It's just like with the dollar. You always break even. Jeff smiled. Are you going to see Bradley too? He asked. Yes, later today. Do you think you'll be able to help him? I don't know. I hope so. I think he needs help even more than me. You won't tell him anything I said, will you? No, that's one of my most important rules. I never repeat anything anyone tells me here, around the round table. Never? She shook her head. What about to other teachers? She shook it again. What about to the principal? Nope. Okay, said Jeff. He took a breath. Here goes. He grimaced. On the way here, I got a little lost and, accidentally went into the girls' bathroom. He covered his face with his hands. Chapter 8. Mrs. Ebel was teaching geography. Everyone in the class had a map of the United States on his or her desk. Bradley's map was different from all the others. California was above Wisconsin. Florida stuck out of Texas. He picked up his pair of scissors and carefully cut out Tennessee. He was a good cutter. The edge of his scissors never left a black line. He wondered what was happening to Jeff. He knew he was at the counselor's office. He imagined she was doing all kinds of horrible things to him. He had tried to tell Jeff at recess not to go see her. He taped Tennessee to Washington. He was a very messy taper. His piece of tape twisted and stuck to itself. He looked up as Jeff entered the room and watched him hang the hall pass on the hook behind Mrs. Ebel's desk. Then he looked away as Jeff headed for the seat next to him. When the bell rang for lunch, he shoved his map into his desk and pulled out his paper sack. Because of the rain, everyone had to eat inside, in the auditorium. He and Jeff walked there together, sort of. He's walking next to me, Bradley thought, but I'm not walking next to him. The auditorium was hot, steamy, and noisy. Loud tables with benches had been set up across the room. Where do you want to sit? Asked Jeff. Bradley ignored him. He stood on his tiptoes and looked around the room as if he was trying to locate his real friends. Jeff walked away and sat at one of the tables. Bradley walked behind where Jeff was sitting. I think I'll sit here, he said aloud, as if he didn't know Jeff was there. He stepped over the bench and sat down next to him. Hi, said Jeff. Bradley faced him for the first time. Oh, it's you, he said. They ate their lunches. What are you eating? Asked Jeff. Peanut butter sandwich, said Bradley as he spoke. Bits of peanut butter and bread flew from his mouth. What about you? Tuna fish, said Jeff. Bradley swallowed his food and said, I hate tuna fish. My mother makes it good, said Jeff. She chops apples in it. I hate apples, said Bradley. He sucked the last drop of milk through his straw, then continued to suck, making a gurgling noise. Sitting 2 tables away from Jeff and Bradley were 3 girls, Melinda Birch, Lori Weston, and Colleen Verigold. They were talking and laughing about something funny that had happened to Colleen that morning. Colleen, who had red hair and a freckled face, covered her mouth with her hand. There he is, she whispered. It's him. Where? Asked Lori. Don't look at him, said Colleen. He's right there, sitting next to Bradley Chalkers. Bradley Chalkers, said Lori. I think I'm going to be sick. Don't look, whispered Colleen. Bradley stopped sucking on his straw. What'd the counselor do to you? He asked. Jeff shrugged. Nothing. Did she yell a lot? Was she mean and ugly? No, she was nice. I think you'll like her. Me? Asked Bradley. I'm not going to go see her. I didn't do anything wrong. She's good at helping you solve your problems, said Jeff. I don't have any problems, said Bradley. He bit ferociously into a red, delicious apple. I thought you said you hated apples, said Jeff. Bradley shoved the apple back into the paper sack. That wasn't an apple, he said. It was a banana. Jeff's face suddenly changed color, first white, then bright red. Ooh, I think he sees you, said Melinda. Lori laughed. Colleen blushed. Come on, said Lori. Let's go talk to him. She stood up. Lori Weston was a short, skinny girl with long, straight black hair. Melinda got up from the table, too. She was nearly twice the size of Lori. She had short brown hair. No, don't go, pleaded Colleen. What's the matter? Asked Bradley. Nothing, said Jeff. So, did I miss anything in class? No, Mrs. Ebel gave everybody a map. I got one. Don't lose it, said Bradley. Mrs. Ebel wants them back. 2 girls were giggling behind them. Jeff and Bradley turned around. Colleen thinks you're cute, said Lori. Jeff blushed. Who? He asked. The girls laughed. What's your name? Asked Melinda. Jeff blushed again. Colleen wants to know, said Lori. Then she and Melinda laughed again. He doesn't have a name, said Bradley, coming to Jeff's rescue. He hated Lori. She had the biggest mouth in the whole school. She was always laughing, too. He could hear her laugh from one end of the school to the other. Ew, Bradley Chalker, said Lori, holding her nose. Lori Loudmouth, said Bradley. We're not talking to you, Bradley, said Melinda. Get out of here, I'll punch your face in, he replied. You wouldn't hit a girl, said Melinda. That's what you think, he shook his fist. Melinda and Lori backed away. We only wanted to know his name, said Melinda. And what he was doing in the girls' bathroom, screeched Lori. The 2 girls laughed and ran back to Colleen. Bradley slowly turned and looked at Jeff, amazed. Jeff sat with his head on the table and his arms over his head. You went into the girls' bathroom? Bradley asked. So what? Said Jeff from under his elbow. Carla says, Me too, declared Bradley. I go all the time. I like to make them scream. He smiled at Jeff.